Greetings, everyone. I'm Dr. Dave Webb, and welcome to the Home Run Leadership Show, our Wednesday webinar to support leadership conversations and running the bases with great leaders. I have another great leader today. Dr. Bob McDowell, superintendent here in Minnesota, is going to use some of his and share some of his coaching. So he'll be my guest coach on today's show, and he'll be running the bases with us using IROD, information, reactions, actions, decisions, the science of four, the core four that all leadership follows. So welcome, Bob, and do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure, thanks. Thank you, Dave, for having me. I'm excited to be here and talk through the IROD process and keeping things as simple as possible, but getting us to where we need to be as leaders in an organization by sticking on the bases.
Great.
My background and experience is as a teacher for many years and a technology coordinator, as a assistant principal, middle school principal, assistant superintendent, and now superintendent.
And tell us your roots. Where did you start and what was your first teaching job?
Yeah, I started teaching in Eau Claire, Wisconsin at North High School. I was an industrial tech teacher. I talk often about how my first year of teaching, I had 5 distinctly different preps. Everything from wood shop to engineering to electronics, architectural drafting. So that was how I started out and working with high school kids, and then made it down to middle school.
And you're all the way into the superintendent chair now, and you have one of the distinct recognitions of starting your very first year as superintendent in the pandemic.
That's correct. That's correct.
So, which is amazing. And I was so impressed with your leadership. I'm always impressed with your leadership before and after the pandemic, but during the pandemic, you ran the bases extremely well. We had a number of conversations because as superintendents, we were calling everyone we knew to take notes, learn from each other, and grow. So one of the things that really impressed me about your leadership was that you had a strong network of colleagues and friends and people that you really leaned on in that first year to reach out to run before you made a decision. You had information, you had a lot of reactions and reflections. You knew there were a couple of options ahead of you. And before you crossed home plate alone, before you just decided alone, you vetted those with other superintendents through phone calls, through collaborative meetings. And nobody did that better than you during the pandemic. So way to go.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it was definitely a group effort. Right. Those were challenging times, and they were for someone coming in new to the superintendency. There's plenty of opportunities to or entry points to fall into a trap somewhere along the line, and COVID added to that. And so, for me, I'm just appreciative of all of the veteran superintendents that were willing to help along the way and provide the guidance and the information.
Yeah, there's no shortage of opportunities to step in it every day.
That's right.
So today I'm going to jump right into the base running, and you know the science, you know IROD, you know the core four that all leadership science follows. But as you became more aware of the science, as you became more aware of IROD, is there a first home run story or a favorite home run story that you tried that you said, hey, that worked right away?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have a few of them. For me, I think you hit the nail on the head that we all go through the process. We all run the bases. The question is, are we aware of it? And are we taking advantage of knowing where we are on the base path based on a given situation? But the one that comes to mind is I walked into a situation where we had a 1.7 million deficit that needed to be cut just as I was coming in. So on top of COVID, we had that going on. And the only way that I could figure out how to get through that was to run bases with my school board and then ultimately the public. So the process that I went through there was simply making sure that we spent a large chunk of time gathering as much information as we could, not only about what needed to be cut and adjusted, but also what was the history, what was the history impact, what were the historical reactions. And it was from there that we were able to then present information and communicate it in such a way that we weren't making budget cuts, but what would have been more favorable would be to make budget adjustments to include revenues and simple tweaks of our current budget, not just eliminating things. That's what the community, that's what my staff needed to hear. And so essentially I was running bases inside of bases, right?
Right.
So we trying to gather the information. When you're in that phase, you might have to run the bases to make a decision on how to present information.
Yeah.
To make that decision. And so that was the first piece. When we got to that spot, however, it was clear that we had to spend a lot of time getting reactions from people. We needed reactions on what do people think about doing X? What's important? What's not important? How far can I push this to get this dollar amount? What are people willing to do? Are they not willing to go up for OPEB dollars, right? Non-voter approved levies, things like that. It wasn't until I had those reactions that I could then circle back to the board and present options to the board and get their reactions to the options. And that, I think, for me, the most overt path there was taking the time to ask my school board, what more information do you need after the options, and continuing to come back to that. What more information do you need? Just to ensure that the ultimate decision makers were able to not only ask all the questions they had, but were given an opportunity to process in their own minds, what is it that they still don't feel comfortable about? What do they need more in order to even develop options in their own head? That led us to making, we were able to do it. We made that cut. We've been doing it since, and it actually has created a new process for us in Hastings with regard to that, like I said, that budget adjustment process, not budget cuts.
So, just to recap there, you have to run the bases multiple times, even to make one big school district decision. So I liked how you said we had to run the bases. We had to run a good process to make a decision, even how we're going to approach budget reductions.
That's it.
So you run the bases to get there. You might do it with a small team. You might get your leadership team there. Then you might have to get the school board there. And then you might have to run the process.
That's right. That's right.
Right?
Yeah.
So, just in our warm up to this call today, you talked about just knowing IROD helps you accelerate your leadership. When you talk when you go home run after home run in one budget reduction process, you might have to run the bases 25 times because the superintendent job is so complex and working with teams and the community and parents and families and the board. Can you talk about that acceleration of IROD and how how knowing the four bases helps you accelerate?
Yeah, I think for me, the first thing that it does is it allows me to decide, and I think this is an important part as well. As a superintendent in particular, there are times when I can't run the bases. It's a risk management decision. Do I have enough time to run all the bases, or am I willing to accept the risk if I don't, right? So you have those emergency situations. But what I find, to answer your question.
Can I interrupt there for 1 second? So I like to call that your super card, where you have to sometimes just play the superintendent card. You can't always run process on everything because some things are emergency situations or you need a really quick decision. And so you still have to play the super card, and principals have to play the principal card, and parents have to play the parent card sometimes. But when you don't have to, when you know that the decision will be stronger when you run process, that's what IROD's all about. And you talked about how you accelerate then your leadership.
Yep. And that's where I was going with it, knowing that you have to hold those you have to know that those are very minute times that you do that, and it's always worthwhile to run the bases because it will get you to a decision faster. And what is meant by acceleration from my perspective isn't the speed, it's the amount of acceptance you have of people to actually implement the decision you've made with very little resistance. And so the decision is accelerated, not necessarily by the chronological amount of time, but with regard to any potential fallout you may have if you've missed a base, the fallout you've had if you've had to use that superintendent card, right? And the bases for me, I call it gaining red carpet. The more I run the bases and the stronger I run the bases, the more red carpet I feel like I'm gaining with people and gaining their trust in process. And that sets me up for when I have to pull from that bucket and very seldom use the superintendent card because people know and understand that there's a process in place. And if I'm not using it, there must be a really good reason why I'm not.
Right.
And that accelerates the organization's ability to get around when I stop them in a certain situation and say, wait a minute, I think we need to back up. I think we need more information. I think we're missing a voice here. Then what accelerates is my team no longer says, I don't understand. I don't understand why you're slowing us down. That's not the question. They now understand that collectively as a group, and I know we'll get to this later, we can't steal a base.
Yeah.
Right? We've got to make sure we've asked that follow-up question. What more information do we need before we move on?
Yeah. So by you knowing the science, by you knowing the best, quickest pathway, so, and those things go together, best and fastest. So the book Homerun Leadership that I wrote, it's your guide to better, faster team decisions. Not sure how that's showing up. There it is. Your guide to better, faster team decisions. It's not good to just make fast decisions alone all the time. Sometimes you do, sometimes you have to play that superintendent card. But when you can bring people around the bases with you, it's better. And then it's counterintuitive. Sometimes slower actually gets there faster because if you jump in and you make a bad decision right away yourself, you're going to have to reset that decision and correct it, which will take double or triple the amount of time.
That's right.
So we called it your guide to better, faster team decisions because we want to move around the bases, get the home run together, not crossing home plate alone. Because I can go out and buy movie tickets for my family, come home and say, hey, I've got 6 tickets to this great movie tonight. And 3 of my kids will say, Dad, we just saw that movie at the theaters last week. Why didn't you ask us? Like I crossed home plate alone. I thought it was a great decision. They'd already seen that movie and they think it's a really lousy decision. So you want to, when possible, run the bases together as a parent, as a principal, as a superintendent, as a business leader, whenever possible. And there are times it's not possible. And Bob was just highlighting, then you can play the super card. So you brought up, Bob, a great phrase about stealing bases. So I have a page right out of my book, which is page 117. It says, what happens if you miss a base? So, and it's really what happens if your team misses a base. So if you miss gathering all the information about a topic, so if you miss the data, details, and let's go back to that budget reduction. If you miss starting with last year's budget and you try building your budget off of just where you think you are, rather than based on last year's budget of what you know was a fact and an audit from the previous year, your budget could be off by a couple of $1 million and you get into deep water really quickly as superintendent. If you skip second base, if you skip the reactions, people won't make that personal connection to the situation. They will say, We were never asked. You never cared about our feedback. We weren't able to improve this and share our concerns for you to grow this idea in a better way. If you miss third base, the options, and you forget to examine the pros and cons and the choices, the team will actually miss the opportunity to make the best possible decision. Like if I had asked my family about what movie tickets to buy, they would have said, "Hey, we already saw the movie, Dad, that you're thinking about. Could we brainstorm other options and get a movie that we all would like to be going to?" That's a way better option when you can get the feedback and look at all options available. So the last base, the decision-making base, fourth base, which is also home plate. But if you miss home plate, that means you're just spinning at first, second, or third, or over again at first, second, and third. If you never cross home plate, you never get to the decision, and your team will become frustrated because your process is stalled or spinning. Well, in a pandemic, that happened every day. We didn't have all the information. We didn't have time sometimes to get everyone's reaction. We looked at best options, but we had to do our best to look at the pros and cons. And oftentimes we just had to move with the will of our team and make our best possible decision. So, Bob, do you have a good base stealing story that you'd like
I
to
do.
share?
I
Go
do.
for it.
Yeah. First year as a superintendent, I came in with some real strong beliefs on grading based on past work. And it was really clear to me from my perspective, right? So my bias in it, that here was something I believed we could change. And because we were in COVID and so much change was happening anyway, now would be a good time to take advantage of changing our grading practices at the high school. And
Sure.
so I didn't run the bases at all with my high school principal at the time. I kind of gave the directive that this is where we wanted to go, and didn't
So you
take.
were crossing home plate
I
alone,
was I
giving the
was on
directive.
fourth base. Like I've already made this decision. We're just back to. I was trying to play the superintendent card with no red carpet, right? Yeah. So unfortunately, we definitely stepped into it in a huge way. Never got off the ground.
Sure.
And the high school staff, in fact, we had this thing set up where we were doing a meeting and trying to explain the why, and the
Sure.
staff took over the meeting and said, no, no, it was a great failure in not only stealing second base, but trying to get a grand slam and not even touching much outside of the batter's box. So yeah.
Can I just compliment you there for a second? Because very few leaders are able to talk about a failure to help everyone else learn from their mistake. So the fact that you can just hold that up, said, "Hey, I dropped the ball on this one.
Mhm.
I had a strikeout here." Just with that one story, you just helped 100 people listening today. So way to go.
Yeah, thanks. It just for me, it's a constant reminder. We talk about obvious, even when we're looking with the four bases and IROD, like how are you constantly being aware, being in the moment? And it's a reminder of how important the information and reaction base running is with staff, particularly in schools, right? You've got to be conscious about always gaining more and more information about your staff, and trying to understand their reactions and why they're reacting the way they're reacting,
Mhm.
to make those decisions. It's all the time.
Yeah, I like telling the story of my first years as superintendent. Before COVID, one of the toughest calls was declaring a snow day.
Yeah.
So we had a Friday afternoon when you think you're done having to make the call, we were scheduled for 18 inches of snow, and it was going to snow into Friday night and throughout Saturday. And we got into a situation where I barely got home because we already probably had 6, 8 inches. You get home and then you're seeing on the television all the school districts in the area closed for the weekend. So I just remember calling my assistant saying, "Hey, I think we should close for the weekend." And she astutely enough said, "I'm not sure I would do that." So, like you, I was already on fourth base. Let's close for the weekend and cancel all activities. And she said, tomorrow morning, Saturday morning, is the Lions holiday breakfast. And 300 people will walk there, even in deep snow, because it's such a great event. And so we ended up canceling the dance. We didn't close for the weekend. We just canceled the student dance. That left the buildings open. 300 people did show up for that event, walk through the
Wow.
snow. Our crews got out, plowed as much as they could, but saved me early on in my superintendency with a great coaching. But I was aware enough to not cross home plate alone and to listen
Oh,
to those warning signals.
sure.
So the more we can keep partnering with our team and all team members, they'll oftentimes give you the warning signals that you missed a base. And in that one, I missed like 3 bases and I was ready to cross home plate alone.
Sure. Sure.
Bob, do you know your leadership type? Did you take the leadership type
Yeah.
assessment yet?
Yeah,
And do you
I
have a
have.
strength? What's your greatest
Um,
strength?
well, I I land on the information, somewhere between information and reactions. I like to have a lot of information. Um, I like to understand impacts. So that's where I end up falling. I would My strength side lands, interestingly enough, I believe, in the somewhere between options and decision making.
Cool.
Um, is where I typically fall. If I have to your point about team, if I have developed my team well enough to provide me good insight, that's the strength side for me. It fills that side of developing appropriate options with them and knowing when to make the decision.
Yeah. So just like Bob is saying, if you know your leadership type, you're one of these 4 types. You have strengths in several of them. But if you are dominant in one, it's really how you lead the group. Like if you are strong as a first baser in information, you have a hard time getting to second, third, or fourth until you get all the information about a situation. And I'm a heavy on the D, a fourth base type. So I just want to make a decision and go, like I did for that school closing. Like let's close for the weekend. That's my leaning. So you always have to make sure that your greatest strength doesn't become your greatest weakness, and that you
Right.
touch all 4 bases to run good process for good team decisions.
Yeah. The one thing that I've appreciated, Dave, in all of our conversations is that follow-up question after each base, right? The
Mhm.
importance of, even when you've gotten to fourth base and you're making a decision, have you taken the time to stop and say, is there anything more?
Yeah.
Is
So
there
can we
anything?
go there?
Yeah.
So if you're a first baser and you think you have all the information, I always say if you're going through the Starbucks drive-through, they're gonna before you place your order and you think you're done, they're gonna ask you one great customer service question, which is there anything else, sir? Anything else? Like you said, anything more? Anything you're missing? Yeah, I'd like a cup of water with that too. Thanks. And they'll say it again. Anything else? If you can keep making sure that you clean up every base as a leader, that's a great base running tip, Bob. Like get all the information, ask anything else. Do we have all the reactions? Anything else? So I think that there are 8 boxes to check for great team facilitation when you're the team facilitator to get all the I, R, O, and D and
Mm.
anything else at all 4 of those bases. Thanks for that great reminder. That's why your guest head coach for today. So way to go. I'm going to change topics on you.
Yeah.
And I think very few people get a chance to get into the superintendent chair like you did. And you have this bird's eye view of one of the most critical areas of leadership in school districts and oftentimes in churches and high level boards in businesses. And it's a governing board,
Mhm.
and they call it governance and management. And there's a chapter in my book just about the roles of a governing board and governance and management teams.
Mhm.
Could you just give us your best couple of minutes on what do you see as those roles for high level finance, policy, and public relations and governance? How do you see those roles playing out in your district? And are there key reminders you'd like to remind people on air today?
Yeah, sure. Um, the it's definitely a relationship, right? In a school district, probably no different than a nonprofit or a church or things like that, where you have a board that's truly a governing board.
Mhm.
So from my perspective and experience, the governing board, their first and foremost priority is the fiduciary responsibility of that organization. So most of the time, a lot of their governing centers around finance,
Right.
is what it centers around. It also then is really about setting direction and setting direction through policy or bylaws or whatever the organization has. But those
Great.
large 100,000 foot, here's how we want the organization to behave
Mhm.
as a general rule. That's the governing side of it. So they're really answering the question in governance of what? What is it? What are we? What's our vision? What's our mission? What does that have to do with it? The management side is really about answering the how. How do we get this done? Whether it's as fast as we can, as efficiently as we can, as cleanly as we can, in a way that helps move that vision, that policy direction in the manner that the governing body wants it to go, or as created a decree for
And
it.
that's a great line there. The governing board is the what, and the management team is the how. That's a
Mhm.
great takeaway for people. And can you talk about what if the governing board gets into management
Mhm.
or the management team tries to do governance? What happens then?
uh, that when we get out of our lane, right? So we call them lanes. When we get out of our lane, we run the risk of creating confusion for the organization and confusion for the people outside of the organization and understanding what is happening and why it's happening. We also have a conflict potential that develops in who should people be communicating with and through when that happens. And so what I try to do in my current role is really hone back on the question of to whom at what cost. That is a governing question. The governing board in its what is really trying to answer if we do X, who will be impacted positively or negatively or not at all by us making a decision to say we're going to do what? And then deciding on the idea of what is my role as a board or director member as part of a governing body, and how do I do that? That's really what I try to circle my current board back to. And then on the flip side, your question about management is for a superintendent. Um, the best graphic I've seen is a superintendent on a ladder coming down from a helicopter, right? And because the superintendent has to come down into management and create the team direction
Mhm.
and how, but they need to go back up that ladder to the helicopter, and they need to be the conduit for the board, be the kind of play into and part of the governing role without giving them the answer to the direction. That's
Right.
not your job. If I become an active board member with my school board, I've gone into governance and I've blurred the lines between the what and the how.
Yeah. And if you decide in governance, if you're making all the decisions, which you can't, people think superintendents just get to decide everything.
Yeah.
But our management team, we elevate the management team if we can get the board good recommendations from the management team. And then all good school boards, all good church boards, all good executive boards for businesses, when they run the bases, they ask 4 questions. Okay, we have this recommendation in front of us for this multi-million dollar tech purchase. Do we have all the information on this? Anything else? Do we have all the reactions from everyone here on this purchase and anything else? Have we looked at all the options here? Is this, we have this option in front of us, but are there any other options we should be considering? And was this vetted appropriately with pros and cons?
Mhm.
Yep, that's all in our executive summary. Great. Anything else? Nope, we're good. All right, let's put it to a vote. Can we get the will of the board to move forward? Do we have majority? Yes. And even after you vote, guys, anything else with this today before we move on? Gives people, even if they voted no, a chance to speak up about why they voted no, and just gives closure to that decision. So Bob reminded us earlier, anything else question is a great cleanup question at every base. It ensures that you touch every base thoroughly and that you stay in your lane. That's a great phrase, Bob, to stay in management or stay in governance and know your role. So thanks for going there. Very few people can articulate that. So thanks for doing that.
Sure, absolutely.
Do you have one last story or piece of advice that you'd like to share with people today before we wrap up?
We talked a little bit about questions, and so I guess what I would leave with is the idea of what are some questions that I'm constantly asking to try and keep us on the bases. And I have 3 questions that I constantly am asking people for. The
Yeah, let's
first
hear
is,
it. Can't
all
wait.
right, so the first is, how do we know? Right. So someone brings something to me as a leader, and I will simply ask them, how do we know? And back to the more information, my follow-up question to that is, how do we know that to be true? So first
Hmm.
being, how do we know it? Is it a perception? Is it a bias? Or is it something we've experienced? And then how do we know it to be true? And then my third question typically is around whose voice is missing from this?
Hmm.
So
Wow.
I find that with those 3 questions, that allows me to get on the base path if we need to get on the base path, if I have the
You
answer.
repeat those 3 one more time.
Yep. I ask, how do we know? So is it a perception or is it reality? And then if it is reality, how do we know it to be true? So push that step a little bit farther. And then finally, if we know it to be true, whose voice is missing from the conversation that we need to get more information from? And so, yes, that would be what I'd leave people with.
Yeah. So, Bob, thank you. Thanks for being a great guest host on our show for today. For being a guest coach, we have our 21 video course that we've developed to go with the 21 chapters of Home Run Leadership that we'd like to give you as a free gift for today.
Oh,
So
thank
stay on
you.
the call after we close out the Zoom, and I'll get you the passcode for that.
Awesome.
For anyone else that's interested in accelerating their team leadership, you can always purchase that video course right on homerunleadership.com, or website. Bob was able to touch on the framework of IROD today, the home run types, the formula for running the bases, and that question, anything else to clean up, make sure you ensure that you touch first, second, third, and fourth base. And he also gave some of his best home run questions. And I think if you know the home run framework, the types, the formula, and the questions, you are a true home run leader. Bob, you are, and keep hitting more home runs every single day.
Great. Thanks for having me, Dave.
Yeah, so I would like to close with just reminding people, if you want to go great places, keep running the bases. We'll catch you next week.